Speaking of the days of Noah, let me ask you a question. Is this skull in my hand, this Neanderthal skull in my hand, not only is this thing bigger, bolder, badder in its brain size, much larger than ours today. Take a look right here. Take a look at the bottom of a Neanderthal skull's teeth. These aren't like your teeth. Look at the comparison of that Neanderthal skull down there compared to a little rinky-dink. Here's the Neanderthal teeth. Here's the little rinky-dink modern human teeth and human skull. And this little Babylonian bad boy, this little guy right here covers the animals getting on board. 2 by 2. So when they say the days of Noah, or as it was in the days of Noah, I guess what they mean is the time period a little before and a little after the flood. So I guess we should start in following the Nakash, the bright, shining serpent in the garden when Adam and Eve were expelled and had these garments given by the hand of God himself in the garden of God. Look at that little writing, that little Sumerian writing right there. Think of the incredible eyesight those people would have had to have read the little bitty text on these stones. This film is a continuation of the Genesis studies. The last section was called Nakash, seed of the serpent. In this particular study, what we're going to be looking at are Sumerian, Sumer, and Akkad documents from ancient Sumer and Akkad leading towards the Tower of Babel, which, by the way, all of these ancient documents are, if they're not the groundwork, they're the actual covering of that tower, and even the discussions of the talking of the building of that tower. We're laying the groundwork of looking at going towards that Tower of Babel and the rise of your first dark empires by Lord Nimrod, who's called on your Sumerian texts, like the Sumerian Kings List, in Merkur, the mighty hunter. Truly the birth of your opening occult empires, following the flood, where all of your opening settlements and cities would begin to emerge right here in what's called the Fertile Crescent, following the Tigris and Euphrates, and swooping down over here into Egypt, where Nineveh, Babylon, Kish or Cush, Uruk, Ur, and of course the ziggurat of Eridu, otherwise known as the Tower of Babel, would take their rise in the new opening of all earth. In fact, all earth would be called at that time Sumer and Akkad. Sumer is typically this area right about here, and Akkad, this area right up in here. And we're going to be looking at a lot of their little rocks, like this copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh that I'm holding in my hand, and sort of going over the basics. Well, they're probably not basics to you, but they might be basics to some of the basics. Some of the basics that even university professors probably don't know, or probably have been taught something that looks more like this, which makes it hard because our past covered on every one of these rocks that we're going to go over in this documentary right here, or this is ridiculousness. And your past covered on all of these stones is far more interesting than to settle for any stuff like this. Here behind me on the screen, the blue arm coming through, that's a recreation. We found a lot of Lucy's at this point. These are ancient knuckle-walking primates. There's a Lucy right there on the screen. That's what a Lucy would have looked like had you come across her in actual real life. And your ancient past, just like the building projects that you find all across the globe that mesmerize and amaze modern engineers. They say, how did these ancient people even build that? And laying in your hands in this set of studies and documentaries that these skulls, like this Neanderthal skull that I'm holding here, with teeth that are not like your teeth. These teeth could last hundreds of years. Your teeth can't do that. Your teeth can't do that. And there's a reason. They're bigger, badder, and more well-built. Everything, even the ancient animals that they're drawing on their rocks. Like this little Narmer palette that I'm holding in my hand. Those are some strange animals that they draw on a lot of rocks. They also draw a lot of dragons and tell you about dragons. That used to be what dinosaurs were called. And they're stating that they were all over the place, and stating that they lived with them and had them as pets. And the skulls that you find all over the world, particularly at some of these giant sites that you're finding that baffle and amaze us. The brain sizes are larger, they're thicker, they're just like the building projects. Thicker, tougher, and more well-built than we are today in every possible way. And I don't believe for one heartbeat that these are anywhere near as old as any university on the planet will tell me that they are. Here's a modern skull. Look how rinky-dink it is. That's us today. This is an ancient skull from our ancestors, and these were not monkey men. Look how tough our fathers before us actually were. And their eyesight was definitely better than ours is today, by a lot. And on all these rocks, although they're not talking about monkey people or monkey worlds, they all talk about the global flood, they all talk about Noah, and they all talk about having survived, coming from the family and the lineage that survived that flood. But they're also talking about a lot of strange things. And I'm going to lay those in this particular film. I want to lay the groundwork for the Tower of Babel and Nimrod. What I want to do is I want to just sort of lay those in your hands so that you can believe about them whatever it is that you will. I'm Trey Smith of God in a Nutshell. So what do you say we take a ride together in ancient Sumer? So we're going to pick up right on the other side of the days of Noah, beginning with this lineage here: Nimrod, Cush, and Ham. The garments that would pass through the hands of Ham, he would actually be the one to steal the garments of Adam and Eve from Noah. And he passed these garments through his son in Sumerian, Meshki, and Gashur, otherwise known as Cush in your biblical text, the founder of the city of Kish, or Cush. The one who, it says, strangely enough, in Sumerian, took off and disappeared on a boat with a bunch of people on a boat. But he gave those special garments to his son, his youngest son, the son of his old age, Nimrod, also called in Merkur. There's an extremely heavy possibility that a lot of your ancient history has been twisted. So we're going to take a touch of a journey into ancient Samaria. Over in the book of Yashar, it says that Cush, that's Ham's son, that Cush gave those garments to the son of his old age, the baby, the spoiled brat, Nimrod of the family. I, the radiant youth, Nimrod is far younger, obviously, than Noah. May I be embraced by you there. He's literally writing this to Noah. May I be embraced by you there. He wants to intimately embrace his sister, Inanna. He wants to embrace and be intimate with Inanna in the inner chamber of a temple that he would like Arata to help him build. That's what's literally being stated. Let Arata submit beneath the yoke of Uruk. May Noah bow to Nimrod. That's what he's stating. The stones that I'm reading this to you off of are called, they're little cuneiform stones, like this guy here. And this is called in Merkur and the Lord of Arata, is what these are. There are a bunch of these. And what's happening is that Nimrod, seen right here, Nimrod, the N means Lord, the Me means secret knowledge from the gods. The Mer, we're going to talk about this later, ties into where you get the concept of merman or mermaid, and the car at the bottom means hunter. Just like in Genesis 10 and verse 8, Cush was the father of Nimrod, who began to be a mighty one in the earth. That's Nimrod. He was a mighty one. He was a mighty hunter, he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, against the Lord. And his kingdom began in Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, in the land of Shinar, where he built Nineveh, Uruk, and right down here, Eridu, which is where the Tower of Babel was. And these little stone guys here, these are like ancient messages. In fact, he goes to great lengths to say that he's having messengers send these little stones all the way up through his kingdom, all the way up to the Lord of Ararat, which is going to tie into the Ararat or the Urartu mountains, the two twin peaks, Little Ararat and higher Mount Ararat of the Urartu mountains. There's no one that Immerker wrote back and forth to with special messengers, whole caravans of special messengers to bring these stones back and forth. There's no one that he wrote to more than the Lord of Ararat. He was heavily trying to get the attention of the Lord of Ararat, which seems to be the same locations. He was taking things back and forth as was described in the Epic of Gilgamesh right there. But in Merkur, our mighty hunter, it's embedded right in his name on these stones. The mighty hunter against the Lord. He continues. And let the people of Ararat, so all of the people living up in the mountains, all the people living up in the mountains with Noah, may they bring down for me the precious holy mountain sacred stones from their mountain to build a great shrine for me, Nimrod. He wants Noah to do this, to build him a shrine. Erect a great abode for me. Make the great abode the abode of the gods. Make me famous. What did they want at the Tower of Babel? Make our name great in all of the earth. This is literally on these ancient stones. Skipping from our Sumerian rocks over to Genesis 11:4, it reads, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches into the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. We may be famous." Notice that word famous. We want to be famous. Me. "Otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Make me great. Erect for me a holy shrine, the great abode for me. Make the great abode, the abode of the gods. Make me famous, make me prosper. Make the Abzu," that means abyss, the underworld domain of the god Enki up here, that comes through his little portal, the portal of the Tiamat, the serpent. "Make it grow for me like a holy mountain, to make me, Nimrod, famous in all the earth." That was written by Nimrod. That's where we start on this one, guys. You're watching part 3 of the Genesis series, the Genesis set by the God in a Nutshell project. And I bet you can guess. Right now. That, by the way, comes off of these little stones, this one that I have in my hand. The Immerker and the Lord of Ararat is what this little rock guy here with this little writing on it is called. And he's wanting to build this abode to the gods, abode to the Enki. I bet you can guess, and we're going to get into it in this film, but I bet you can guess, try and guess, who it was that Nimrod, on these little rocks, was writing back and forth to. This is Trey Smith of God in a Nutshell, and we're going to be taking a journey right now into the world of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. The word Babel, like the Tower of Babel, the origin actually of Babylon, all occult in your world today, beginning with the sun god, that's a little sun disk up there. All occult in your world today is going to trace its way back. This is called the Fertile Crescent right here, or the cradle of civilization. the place where all of your earliest little documents, all of your earliest little scribbles and writings on stone come from this area, these two areas stretching down into Egypt right here. This is where the origin of every empire you've got comes from here, right where the boat that saved mankind landed. And at the start of these brick-built empires, we have Babel, which would become Babylon. Now, if we look at Babel, Bab is going to mean gate, and El is going to mean God. So this is quite literally the gate of the god, or the gateway of the gods, is the tower they were building to make themselves famous. And Nimrod is synonymous to this day, at least in English, for idiot. These are the words of Jesus from Matthew 24. Always notice the numbers. It's a number of high authority. Beginning at verse 37, 3 and 777, the days of Noah. For as it was in the days of Noah, this is Jesus saying this, so also shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the very day that Noah entered the ark, entered that boat right there, where the animals came, 2 by 2. Until the day that Noah entered the ark. And then they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and swept them all away. So the Aztecs of Mexico, the Sun Age lasted 676 years. And then a great flood killed everyone but Nota, notice the names, and his wife, Nina, who were told to stop making an alcoholic drink called pulque. They made a great boat out of cypress. As I flip the page, in the Mayans of Central America, after a flood, only 4 couples existed, but 3 of them repopulated the entire earth. The Mayans also tell of a time where the people gathered into one place and discovered how to make fire, like the fire pits of Babylon, and then learned that they could no longer understand one another. Their tongues got confused. This according to the Mayans. Interestingly enough, the wives were said to have been created while the men slept. This is in the Mayan legend. I want to give all glory, the Lord God on high, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, for this video that you're about to embark on and watch the journey we're about to take together. This particular film, the third of the God in a Nutshell Genesis studies, is titled Secrets of Sumerian Stones. So this is an ancient Sumerian tablet. This is called the Utu tablet, or the Shemesh tablet for the sun god there. So you have these 3 little figures with the water imagery underneath and the Shemesh. So here's that same little tablet guy, the Utu or Shemesh tablet. This is a pretty precious tablet to the ancient Sumerian world. Whatever the case, I want you to take it right at the start of this video. I want you to notice on this tablet, here's the Utu, or the sun god. Notice he's wearing a special garment. It's got these waters underneath all of them. Maybe those are the waters of the flood. And then here's these 3 characters here. And the last one, or perhaps the youngest one, also has on these special garments. So why don't you take a guess right at the start of this video what this tablet, just your best guess, what it might be representing. With these 3 characters and that youngest one with the special garment right there. And while you think about that right at the start of this video, and we begin in with these bloodlines, and of course we have Shem, Japheth, and of course the youngest Ham that stole the garments. We're going to be taking a ride through this lineage here and poking up to see what old Nimrod, or in Merkur, is writing on his ancient stones. earth. What does it say right up here on these Sumerian stones? He was writing to Noah. He wants Noah to build him a great abode, a great city and tower, right on these stones. Make me famous, he says, right on his own rocks. The correlations between what you find in the biblical account, specifically in this case the book of Genesis, and what you actually find on all those dusty old rocks out there in ancient Samaria, ancient Akkad, what would actually be ancient Assyria, is beyond stunning. Remember, he said, make me famous, make me famous. I want to build the big abode to the gods. Build for me, build for me. In Genesis 11:4, it states, come, let us build for ourselves a city. That's what Eridu was. They shopped for a city, a best place of land, with a tower that reaches to the heavens. That's what a ziggurat is, i.e. the ziggurat of Eridu, shaken to its base, so that we, Nimrod, when he says we, he really means me, 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 so that we may make a name for ourselves. We may be famous. What did he keep stating on his stones? Had this been allowed to continue, had the Lord God not swept the floor out from underneath Nimrod's little feet, the world would have spiraled into a dark abyss from the very beginning following that flood that is unimaginable. May we be famous, just like he said on his stones. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. So you've got to figure that Noah, or whoever one might imagine that he was, dearly writing this kind of babbling nonsense to, was thinking to themselves, surely you can't be serious. In this documentary, we're going to be correlating a lot of the ancient tablets, ancient Sumerian tablets, with the actual biblical text. And even if one were to go a little this way or a little that way, guys, I think it's probably close. So on the Sumerian kings list, coming right after the flood, you start in with Utu. Utu, also called the Shemesh. This is the Shemesh tablet right here. The next down on the Sumerian kings list is going to be Meshki and Gasher. Now, this is the founder of the city of Kish, or Cush, who I believe is the actual biblical Cush, is who it is. Now, Cush's son, his son of his old age, the spoiled baby of the family, is going to be Nimrod, which is where we get in Merkur and the Lord of Aratta, where he's riding back and forth up into the mountains. He's writing to someone, a blessed figure up in the mountains. It's the most writing he did to anybody, was to this Lord of Aratta, that he viewed as a holy figure up in the mountains. And when you're looking at the biblical text, you're really looking at a tale of two cities, just like there were two trees, Babylon and Israel. Erect the great abode for me, make me prosper above the Abzu, grow for me like a holy mountain, make me, Nimrod, famous in all the earth. It's a Sumerian stone right there. The city of man and the city of God, two different paths, just like these two lineages here, Shem and Ham. There are really three advances of darkness, is what a rabbi would state. Three advances of darkness. One, you have the fall of man, the entrance of the Nakash, the serpent. Number two, the events that transpired at Mount Hermon. And number three would be Nimrod's tower, right there at Babel, the holy abode of the gods. Build for me. Bring me a precious stone. You gotta be out of your mind, man. I think where we need to begin, even with Gilgamesh, where we need to begin is backwards to our Nakash, all the way back to the Garden of God, to our Nakash in the garden, and our two trees, the tree of eternal life, like a choice, two paths, our tree of life and our tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This comes from Enoch 32, and Enoch, that would be, if authentic, which I believe it's a pre-flood text. Verse 3, and I came to the garden of righteousness, and afar off trees more numerous than these trees, and very great. 2 trees there, very great and beautiful and glorious and magnificent, and the tree of knowledge, whose holy fruit they eat and know great wisdom. Now, if I look at ancient Assyrian reliefs, actually some of their most prized ancient Assyrian reliefs, in this case, from the actual city of Nimrod, what you're looking at here, you're looking at, these are called Apkelu. These are sages. These were actually Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian. These are sages, is what they are. They're witch doctors, is what they are. And just like we have the raven or falcon-headed Apkelu, the witch doctor in ancient Samaria, over here we have Horus, the falcon-headed child, just like Tammuz, and just like Lord Vishnu in the Ganesh right here. We have this trinity in ancient Egypt, Isis, who corresponds with Inanna or Ishtar, and the god Osiris, which kind of corresponds, these are actual people, kind of corresponds with the same model as Nimrod. Osiris is the son of Anam. These were actual people. These aren't just mythological characters. They're based on actual people. We'll find that as we get to the Exodus. And the child offspring, the part man, part bird, Horus. And here behind me, this is off the walls of the Karnak temple. This is the god of wisdom, Thoth, standing right here. We've got tree of wisdom, or a tree, Egyptian tree of life. Karnak temple, that's bar none, probably the largest temple in ancient Egypt. And it's located in Luxor. And I tell you, some of the things we got from Egypt were hard to get to bring to you.
We wanted to film the inside of not only Akhenaten's tomb, but also his visor eye. Keep in mind, film and sound equipment are strictly forbidden within any of these rarely seen ancient sites. So we met with some men and made an arrangement. They would unlock the tombs of both kings and allow us to film inside. But in the interest of safety, they would use their own warm and fuzzy guides to take us there.
Walking inside the tomb of the Pharaoh Eye. This is the famous visor of Akhenaten and the famous King Tut. And we're looking at imagery, at least in this part of the film, from ancient Egypt. We're focusing in here on this character, this part man, part bird character called Horus, that is strikingly similar. In fact, all of the religious basis. Now, the people are different people in Egypt from in Sumer and Akkad. But the bird-headed character, all of these witchy characters, part man, part bird offspring of Osiris and Isis, looks very similar to the concept of Inanna, Nimrod, and the Tammuz. More specifically, Horus looks like a copy of one of the demigod jinn, or genie, where we get the word genie from, or an ancient wisdom wish demon from the Assyrian Empire, Sumer and Akkad. One of the Apkelu, the bird-headed Apkelu sage, witch doctor, sage, on the screen right there. But moving backwards from the Egyptians, and mind you, you're going to find this symbolism not only in all of these empires, but all of the subsidiary empires thousands and thousands of miles apart, from China to Africa. But if we move backwards from Egypt back to Samaria, Assyria, we find the Trinity that could appear to be the origin here: the fish man, the bird man, or the winged man, and of course the falcon-headed Apkallu. And on this side, so it's got the head of a falcon or raven or crow. And on this side, and this is common with the Apkallu, that you've got in the imagery, you've got the Assyrian, you've got a depiction. What they're trying to portray here is the characters, they're witch doctors protecting the tree of life, and portray that to the common man. Now if I come over to this image, you can see here that sometimes the Apkallu can be portrayed as falcons or crows, always with wings if it's a bird-like image. But over here, you see it can also be portrayed as little men that are fish. And between the two of them, you've got, here again, the tree of life in this image. And above, Anu or Anshar, the sky god, the prince of the air to the Sumerians. And their layout over here, just underneath the Tiamat, the great serpent goddess, Anshar is the great-grandson to the serpent god or goddess. And Anu is the son of Anshar. And of course the Anunnaki or the Titans would be the sons. Basically the Titans come from the great serpent. That's what's being expressed on these tablets. And the serpent is the mother of the prince of the air. All the same thing. Now to the Sumerians or the Assyrians, Ningishda, that's the lord of the good tree. Now watch this. Now this is a vase right here. A Sumerian vase right here with Ningishda on there. The double helix or the twisted serpents going up to the top. On this side of the vase you have, of course, Mushu, that would be Marduk's pet dragon. But the two serpents. Now this name in Sumerian means Lord of the Good Tree. This is one of two Sumerian guardians. The other, of course, is Dumazid, or otherwise known as Tammuz, the goat. Which is fascinating. You're probably familiar with the Baphomet, the horned goat with the wings, the Baphomet here. And what has he got coming up from his pants? The double helix twisted serpents coming up from his male organ. And of course the creation god, or one of them for ancient Egypt, a bunch of serpents on top of his head. Man, this goat truly gets around, doesn't he? Here we have Osiris, the god of the dead, and of course Isis, displayed in this Egyptian imagery as serpents, as if depicting the actual spirit behind the god of the dead. What a surprise. Now, speaking of stories that come right after the flood, if I go all the way over to China, and that's a long ways from ancient Samaria, we find the legend, the ancient legend, actually the triad of characters, but two of them are Nua and Fushi. Now, these are the characters that survived, these are the people in their midst that survived the global flood. But here's the funny thing. Nua and Fushi, let me move my dinosaur head here. A lot of dragons in China, aren't there? Nua and Fushi, just like when you pass a story to a friend who passes it to a friend, and you made it all the way out to China. Well, in the legend of Nua and Fushi, not only are the names backwards, they got the names backwards, so Nua is actually Fushi and Fushi is actually Nua. So they sort of confuse the names. That's not the only thing they got backwards. So Noah has become a snake. Now, does the bottom half of Nua and Fushi look like the Ningishda from the ancient Sumerians, the guardians of the tree? And beside him, the dragon, Mushu. Let's keep going. So quite literally, the legend of Noah's flood has actually morphed them into serpent gods. But if I come from China, just right next door, over to India, and by the way, both of them come together in Tibet, where you'll find this triad here. In fact, they fight over who owns the holy mountain. For them, Mount Kailash is like the Olympus for the Greeks or the Mount Hermon for the fallen angels, where the story originates from. And by the way, in the book of Enoch, all of these, the characters, he's almost describing a dimensional, mechanical, biological world, more real than this one, that's behind the scenes of this one. That we as mankind, we're like the ghosts in that real reality. Coming over here to India, here's Vishnu in his fish form. Now, here is Lord Garuda. Now that's Vishnu's bird. Vishnu's mythical, magical bird. And apparently outfits were worn for this bird. And again, there's the Apkallu, or probably the source version of that. Can be kind of an unfriendly looking sucker, can't he? But Vishnu in his fish form looks an awful lot like in Africa, and that's a long ways from China. The Mami Wata, there she is right there. In Africa, they have the Sangoma. In fact, all over Africa, in fact, all over China, Tibet, these places are known for magic, or magic really is if you're calling out for things behind the scenes, which, by the way, they wouldn't be doing it if it weren't effective. Little things playing with this or that, almost like magic behind the scenes. If you're dealing with something intelligent that seems like it's as close as the air between your fingers, yet it's listening, and part of its story of itself is that it's older than you and wiser than you, then why is it talking to you? That's a good first question, isn't it? In Haiti, they've got the voodoo. In Africa at large, they've got the Sangoma. This is Mami Wata. But wait a second, she can take a different form. The serpent goddess, Mami Wata, is right there on the screen. But coming back to the fish form, there's Africa. That's Mami Wata. Right here is India, China. There's Vishnu in the fish form. And over here, of course, would be the Philistine god, Dagon, right there. Those guys look like they originated from Samaria with these Apkallu here. So it's a whole cast of characters that we now see once the eyes are opened, the ayin is opened by the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If the light within you is darkness, then how great is that darkness? This is a very famous painting, this right here, with the goat coming up from the encirclement of witches. It's actually called the Witches' Sabbath. As if there's something physical, there's the ayin, and something spiritual or dimensional, like two dimensions running side by side, literally like the show code key on the other side of reality, and dark things appear. But like there's this inherent knowledge in all of us that there's some kind of symbolic imagery about the goat and about the serpent. The Sumerians are telling us they believe those are the guardians of the holy tree. I think Enoch's going to disagree with that. Enoch 32 continues, verse 4. That tree is in height like the fir, and its leaves are like those of the carob tree, and its fruit is like clusters from the vine, very beautiful. And the fragrance of the tree penetrates from afar. Then I said, these are to the angels that he was with. There was 7 angels. 7 angels, just like in the book of Revelation. You have 7 angels. Interesting. How beautiful is the tree, and how attractive is it to look at. Eve said it was attractive to the eyes. Then Raphael, the holy angel who was with me, answered and said, this is the tree of wisdom, of which thy father, old in years, and thy aged mother, who were before thee, have eaten. And they learnt wisdom, and their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked. What does that mean? Naked, arum, a property of the serpent. And they were driven out of the garden. So the Ningishta, the Lord of the Good Tree, along with Tammuz, claim that they are the Sumerian guardians. Well, that's interesting, because speaking of things coming a long way from dusty old sets, of Sumerian stones, isn't that the Baphomet or Tammuz right there? Boy, he's made it all the way to this modern age. In fact, there are outcries to put him in front of courthouses. And looky what he's got. We've gone from Bel to, well, are these little children at the side? They're looking up, no less, to the goat, the bringer of wisdom, assuredly. And what is this right here between his legs? Is that the same serpents that I saw all the way back on some of the earliest Sumerian inscriptions, along with Marduk's pet dragon? Is it strange to you that characters fundamentally coming off of ancient sets of stones are thought about to get put in front of your courthouses right now today? Well, whatever the case, boy, Pan has sure wiggled his happy little way through all of these sets of empires. From the Assyrians, Sumerians, the Egyptians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, all the way down to the Romans. He's just a dancing and playing his flute all the way back to the very beginning as Enkidu, Gilgamesh's friend. But wait a second. Even before we had Pan's cave right there at the base of Mount Hermon, this side of the flood, where the Richie Riches, the elites of that day, would gather in their togas to do whatever it is they do. Well, back on the other side of that flood, in Enoch, it reads this. Enoch 9, beginning in verse 6. I always notice the numbers. Azazel. Now, Azazel is the goat, the scapegoat, right? Thou seest what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And Simyaza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates. These are the angels that made entrance at Mount Hermon, where they're worshiping Pan. And they have gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and they have slept with the women, and they have defiled themselves. This is the angels it's talking about. And revealed to them all kinds of sins. And the women have borne giants. These are the Nephilim. The Nephilim, and they weren't just giants, it's all sorts of weird things. And they have borne giants, and the whole earth has thereby been filled with blood and unrighteousness. And now, behold, the souls of those who have died, and are crying and making their suit, the sons of men that are crying, and making their suit to the gates of heaven, and their lamentations have ascended, and cannot cease, because of the lawless deeds which are wrought upon the earth. Chapter 10, verse 8, and the whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. So what is this we're walking into?
What we walk right now?
Yes.
Canaanite tunnel 4,000 years ago.
Oh, tell me about this. This is a Canaanite tunnel.
Yes, Canaanites were walking through this tunnel
Okay.
in order to get water from the pool. You can see all the lizards.
The Canaanites who lived in this area
4,000 years ago.
4,000 years ago. Okay, the Canaanites that the Israelites conquered.
Before Israelis conquered Jerusalem, the Canaanites were living here.
The Canaanites were here. Okay, and so these are. Okay, so this shaft that we're looking at, is this a Canaanite thing that was built?
Yes.
This is a Canaanite pool. Okay. Now, the character of the Baphomet, or the goat, representing some kind of a large-scale spiritual character, a fallen angel, behind the scenes, worshipped in different forms. Like here you have a recreation of Moloch that was actually done for a film in 1914. But Moloch is, of course, the goat or the cow or the bull headed. The smoke would come from the stomach, and they would come and literally sacrifice. So this entity behind the scenes, represented by these idols, would want you to come and sacrifice your children. Baal worship or Moloch worship is going to tie all the way forward to what the Israelites, when Moses was gone for too long at the base of Mount Sinai, they were waiting for him and they thought, he's taken off on us. that they were going to run back to the Egyptian practices. And they made a golden cow, and this angered God greatly. The golden cow is a throwback to the gods of the Egyptians, like the god Hathor. So this Narmer tablet that I'm holding in my hand, this is a recreation of one of the first kings or first pharaohs of all Egypt. And you can see prominently at the top of the palette, you have the god Hathor, this horned god with the little horns, just like Tammuz, or the goat, or Dumazid, or Pan has little horns on top of his head. That's Hathor, which is what they were following here at the base of Mount Sinai, making their golden cow, their golden Hathor, in the month of Tammuz. Now, through the sons of Noah, so you have 3 sons, you have Shem, Japheth, and the youngest one was Ham. Now, when Noah issued the blessings and the cursings, and by the way, it's not common to issue cursings of any of the sons, but whatever had happened had Noah so angry at Ham, something to do with nakedness inside the tent, and Ham kept coming in and out, and some tie-in with Canaan, with his son Canaan. Ham had 4 sons, one of them was Canaan, that Noah actually placed a curse. He said, "Cursed be Canaan." Cursed be Canaan is where he placed the curse. Now, of the sons of Ham, so through Cush, you would get Nimrod, who would run the empire. Then you have Egypt, or Egyptus, or Mizraim, which is going to be the name in your Bible for Egypt. That's where you get the name Egypt. The country of Egypt is through that son. Then you would have Put. Then you would have Canaan, and through Canaan you had lots of weird stuff, including the Baal worship and heavy child sacrifice. In fact, there may have been very strange, even physical things, which we're going to look at, surrounding this child Canaan. Canaan had 11 sons, which is already, the numerics are always something to keep your eyes on. God uses numbers a lot. But he had 11 sons, and through there you get King Og, the base of whose empire was at the mouth of Mount Hermon. In fact, King Og was buried in a black stone that many believe fell from the sky. And what all of these documents are telling you, particularly the pagan documents, whether I'm dealing with Gilgamesh or I'm dealing with Enmerkar, who is Nimrod, ancient Nimrod on his stones, Gilgamesh, who appears to have been, according to his own rock, on the Epic of Gilgamesh, he begins by stating he's the son of Lugalbanda, who was Nimrod's second in command. Now, in Gilgamesh's case, his rocks read like a spoiled brat. They read like the very spoiled rich kid son of the kings of Babylon. And that would make sense because on his rock he's stating that his father is Lugalbanda, who would eventually become a king, but would be the second down under Nimrod or under Enmerkar. He also, however, records on the Sumerian kings list, when it talks about Gilgamesh, it says that Gilgamesh, whose father is the unseen one. Gilgamesh is always recorded to us as being a giant. He holds a lion like it's a kitty cat. But as if on all of these rocks, particularly at that time, there was a real big deal to try and do these summonsings to the horned goat, do an invocation, and therefore somehow or another, however you might imagine that, to birth these children, or at least claim to. Gilgamesh says what he says. Gilgamesh, whose father is the unseen one, the dark unseen one. These are all dark practices that we're doing and reading about on these sets of rocks. He was a playboyish Kid King, and that's the way that the document reads. Well, his best friend would be Enkidu, which is the goat man. He's often doing intimate things with animals, particularly goats, even on statues and such. Now the name Enkidu, it begins with Enki. Enki, who comes from the dimensional portal. That's what the tower they were building was about, was the worship of the Enki. He comes from the abyss, the Abuso, the underworld is where he comes from. Enkidu means Enki created. So they're literally discussing, no matter how you view it, they're literally discussing on these rocks a physical character birthed from a dimensional character, creature, that comes from the abyss, the underworld, the Enki, made Enkidu, or Tammuz, the goat. This could also take the shape of Baal, or Baal, which means Lord. And of course, Pan with his flute. We all know the Pied Piper's story, where he's going to lead the children in and drown them, is actually the kind of a twisted children's story there. But they're lured in through the musical abilities of Pan, or the Pied Piper. And these practices, and what I'd really like to sort of begin in with, don't actually start with Nimrod. They're inherited by Nimrod, just as they're inherited by Gilgamesh. They believe all of this occult stuff. Nimrod, when he's writing back and forth, all of this occult stuff is the best thing since sliced bread. He doesn't believe there's anything wrong with it. Let me couch that a different way. He does know. There's no one writes as arrogantly as what's on these rocks. It's almost as if Enmerkar or Nimrod is working really hard to overcompensate. I'm the big shot, you know who I am, kind of a thing on these stones. Nearly every sentence of it. And on these little stones, Enmerkar, or that's another name for Nimrod, and Nimrod or Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta, I'm speculating that the Lord of Aratta, just like on all of these other rocks, well, especially Gilgamesh, Noah is called Utnapishtim. On the Eridu Genesis, he's called Zoroaster. Well, Lord of Aratta is a reference to, well, he's writing, Nimrod is writing from down here at Eridu, where the Tower of Babel was, and he's writing back and forth these really arrogant, prideful, very jerk-like messages up to someone up here in the Urartu Mountains. I'm guessing that just like Gilgamesh was talking about Noah when he said Utnapishtim, and just like the Eridu Genesis has another name for Noah, that Lord of Aratta is Noah, who he's babbling off on these very rocks about building the tower, the great abode to the gods. Build for me, build for me. The Tower of Babel is what he's talking about. He talks on that same document about the confusion of tongues. And he's going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with extraordinarily arrogant and prideful writing to, I believe, who is none other than, he's writing to Noah. And being really arrogant and prideful about it is what he's doing on these rocks. The number one thing that God hates most is pride. And the reason he's so over the top arrogant, in my view, on these rocks is because he knows that there are things wrong with everything about him. And that's why even in the lineage of kings leading to this day, that there's so much boastful words about themselves. Is it starts with this guy here and all his pride about himself. And when I think about pride, I think of this scripture here from Proverbs 16:18, 1618. You know, the art community and the entertainment industry often uses, that's the golden rule, or the golden number. I actually come from the rule family, so that number was kind of funny to us, 1.618, the golden ratio, the golden rule. Well, there's a lot of pride in those communities. The number one thing God hates most is pride. What's also fascinating is that the occult seems to really go out of its way, or the spirits behind which decide to do that, to absolutely obliterate and destroy and make them unhappy people, just like Nimrod was. Everyone that was surrounding Nimrod by the end of his life were either trying to bail on him or take him for everything he's got. And he lived a miserable man. Every talent he had stolen right from under his feet. And even though he lived an extraordinarily, the wealthiest life you could have at that time, probably what you and I could only dream, that world is probably far different than what we might imagine in our mind. But even today, speaking of the golden ratio or the golden number, one of these numbers that artists seem to like a lot, it's like the occult likes to just tear the soul out of those people. The same way it did. It did to ancient Nimrod and take them for every last thing they've got, even the little God-given talent that they had. Speaking of the number 1618, my uncle, one of my uncles, named Stan Rule, he put together these children's books which seem to be doing well, actually in a lot of Christian schools and Catholic schools, but they're called Pansy and the Promise. And Pansy was my great-grandmother, and Pansy Rule, Pansy and the Promise. And I'm going to put a link for his books in the bottom of these. I got to reading one of these while I was on a trip, and some of the kids did too that were around me, and they all just, I can see why they've been doing well in some of these schools. But in a time period where there's maybe a lot of fights against integrity in all ways, but even in the teaching of children, Pansy had said some things. She lived until just a little after I was born and told my mother some things, and that's why I was interested to read this set of books, and they're all illustrated. They have little cartoons in them. And I was like, wow, I was brought to tears by these books. But I think your kids will love them. You might even love them. So it's Pansy and the Promise. I'll put the link below. And thank you for taking a second to listen to this. By the way, the videos and the continuation of what you're watching, like the full-length Tower of Babel, which is, by the way, maybe a little grittier in this particular film that you're watching, but it's also a lot more of a roller coaster and a thrill ride. If you like this one, you're definitely gonna love that one. But they don't have any ads in it, like you might find Facebook ads or YouTube ads or Google ads or whatever kind of ads, or even ads for Pansy and the Promise. You're not gonna find those in the documentaries over on God in a Nutshell. So, and I put together a full-length Tower of Babel, which I think is kind of important. In these hours where you're hearing a lot of talk about secret societies and people that want to take over the world and all these kind of things and plots behind the scene, a lot of this stuff does sound like things that you're watching in your news, right? For example, in Revelation 9, where you have the smoke from the pit and the sun is darkened, and you have these biological creatures that come out of the pit, or maybe they're military things. I don't know. We're on the road to find out. But in the hours where everybody is getting marked like cattle, you get called cattle a lot. The mark of the beast, the 666. Of course, the 6 is the Vav, the symbol of the Vav, and the Vav is it's the sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The rabbis believe that the number 6 is the only letter which connects heaven to earth. And actually, when it's in the first place it's used in the Torah, in the book of Genesis, is on the 6th word. So when it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens, Vav, and the earth. So it's actually the letter that starts the word that's connecting heaven and earth. And it is the 6th word that starts the Torah. And it's also the 22nd letter starting the Torah, in the book of Genesis. And there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the 6. It's a duality. And 666 would be the ultimate trifecta. So when you talk about doctrines of devils, you're really talking about doctrines of man. And when you talk about the Tower of Babel and the big iron, which they all seem to really like, and these sort of quiet outfits, and all the 333s everywhere. Or I guess it's just 3 and 3, which would be 6. And the 6s all over the place. And the iron that's peeking through from atop the first tower. So you would expect to be recreating another tower. Now, if I were looking at models of things, I'm just going to throw this out there very respectfully. Don't come kill me. If I were looking at models of things and men trying to build towers with eyes on top. By the way, that eye is meant to take its rise again in the end, but probably, not like a lot of people think. But like might be in this video back here. If I were looking at models of things, you'd have a lot of men make us powerful, make us rich, make us famous. Do as thou will. In our groups behind the scenes, building our towers that we may shake our fists at God. What my immediate thought would be is the same that you see in this story here, where God, having authored the book of Revelation, or the book of the revealing of the king, is going to say to those men, don't you tell me what my plans are. You may have all your golden cows down there at the base, doing all the little pagan whatever. I'm telling you what I keep thinking and hearing about this time period. Men are building these towers, all these little 6s. And by the way, the valve, so Jesus, when he was on the cross, you would have 3. So the symbol for the nails would be the valve, right? So there were 3 nails, one in each hand and one in the feet. So that's what was nailing the hands and the feet. But it wasn't the nails that held Jesus to that cross. It was his love for you and I. You may have some dark days ahead. The text promises you that. Don't rush those. Don't rush those. Even if you're dark guys, don't rush those. I don't think it turns out the way you think. But if I were to best guess, for those building towers, that God might say what he always says. Don't tell me what my plans are. And that the crumbling of the tower, right, if that's the model of some of these behind-the-scenes societies, which those are their claims, not mine, then one would expect that just a pinch before it looks like everything is in the palm of their hands, it slips right through the fingertips and the floor comes out from underneath the feet, the tower falls. And even the tongues are split up. And even worse than all this, the wealth of the wicked is somehow slipped over to the hands of the righteous by God himself. Because that would be the model of the Tower of Babel. Allow me to make that presentation to you over on God in the Nutshell. You're going to absolutely, even if you're on the other side, man, you're going to want to watch that one. It's an incredible film. But one more thing on the Tower of Babel. If you're looking forward to a financial system that would emerge that would require marking everyone so they couldn't buy or sell without the mark of the beast. So they're all marked like cattle in this system. Maybe it's a little triangle with an eye in it or whatever that mark may be. The concept behind it, well, the mark, the 666, or the beast, or the man, doctrines of men are the same as doctrines of devils. Well, you would literally expect to find that 666 because looking back at the Tower of Babel time period, well, one could make an excellent case that the ancient Sumerians, certainly at the time of the Tower of Babel and following, where a lot of dark things would follow the Tower of Babel. So you had a lot of men that thought, we're powerful, we're rich, we're going to be, and the tower would fall from under their feet. God would actually prosper the righteous. And it would be through the mechanism of that you would have some of your real dark systems emerge. So that would be the model that I would be anticipating finding going towards your end times. Plus, it reads a little off if you look at their documentation. I don't know. God just doesn't like it when you tell him what to do, which is what all of these stones do and what they did at the Tower of Babel. But 666, well, look at this, George. During the time of the Sumerians and the Tower of Babel, you can make a very strong case that they were using a sexagesimal system. What this means is that they had a lot of 6s, a lot of 60s, and a lot of 600s, or 666. In other words, you were buying and selling, in all accounts, in their system, with 666. And I just would like to bring this to your attention, no matter who you are that's watching this video. Even some of the really rich and powerful guys, some of these people, to be very frank with you, there's some of, you'd be like, wow, it'd be really neat to meet that person. And you meet them and you're like, wow, these are some of the most miserable people on earth. Not all, but some. Almost as if the more power that they have, you just inherited another empire. It's just, there's nothing that doesn't upset them. In fact, the more that they have, the more upset that they seem. Guys, please. I would ask anybody, just return to the basics of all of it. And this is what my mother would tell me. Men run to the end times, and those are fun. These documentaries, you're going to go through Nimrod. Oh, he's totally mad. The more powerful he becomes, the more mad he is about everything. And this is why the floor crumbles from under him. And he's always telling God how God's going to run his show. And in fact, Nimrod believed he was living in those end times. He was trying to build those end times at that time. So men have been trying to do this since the very beginning. And I will not argue with any of you. You're getting close. But at the end, see, from the beginning of the book, God has been talking about his harvest. It's not the devil's story. It's simply not. He's a part of that story. The fruits of the Spirit. In fact, my mother would always tell me, God's harvest. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. If you read any books in the Bible today, if you've never read the Bible before, remember them like this. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. General Electric Phone Company. These are love chapters, love books. The joy of the Lord. The joy of the Lord. You want to know what will hold off the Antichrist? To have joy of the Lord. You know what will hold off those systems? Do you know what made the walls of Jericho crumble? The walls, they thought it was impenetrable. And then they were terrified of those people because God acted. It's the joy of the Lord. It's the fruits of the Spirit. Fruits of the Spirit, right? And these are all above natural. They're above the checkerboard floor, the white and the black, right? Because nature, right? There's a big praise of nature in these hours. Big praise of nature because nature is brutal. It does whatever it wants. It's a fallen nature. It just eats whatever it needs, whenever it wants, fills its gut, fills its belly. It doesn't love its neighbors itself. It doesn't. So maybe it's as kind as it is brutal. Whatever path will get it quickest to its end. The fruits of the Spirit are above that. They're stating to love your neighbor as yourself. The fruits of the Spirit. And by the way, you have plenty of time. Even dark guys, you got plenty of time to be angry later. That's easy. To be above the natural. To be a higher level of the natural. It has these aspects. In 5:22. Just like there are 22 letters to the Hebrew alphabet. Fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. All these men with all this power, yet they have not the power to have mercy, like God has had mercy on all of us, and especially many of them. And if a man has lots of power, and mercy, by the way, is undeserved kindness. But if a man has lots of power, but he does not have the power to have mercy, then what power did he ever have? The fruits of the Spirit. My mother would always say, keep your eyes on the harvest. And don't keep your eyes on the dark people. They'll pull you into their world. They'll entrap you in their world. There are good days ahead for all of you. Well, maybe not all of you, but many of you. If you're following this, if you have the joy of the Spirit, the joy of the Lord in your spirit, you've always, even when the world burns to the right and to the left, you will walk straight through it, singing. Get a copy of Pansy and the Promise, even if you're an occultist or an atheist. Go get a copy. Pansy and the Promise, I'll put a link in the bottom by my uncle, Stan Rule. But more than that, make absolutely certain that you get a copy of my books. And if you get them from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, make sure you do a review of these books. And come over to God in a Nutshell when you're finished with this film and watch the full-length Tower of Babel. And by the way, beyond that one, what I've been working on is Nimrod, End of the Dark Lord. And that one's, if you think the Tower of Babel knocks your socks off, that's both of those are absolutely epic. Only available at GodInANutshell.com. All right, let's get back into the days of Noah, Sumerian stones, and back into this journey. So the golden rule, perhaps, is to not have pride, to be humble. To be humble. You never go wrong by being humble. Nimrod was everything but humble. And in this story, even on his own stones, you're going to watch everything he has crumble away from him. All of it. Unexpectedly. Pride goeth before destruction. That's Proverbs 16:18. And haughtiness before the fall.
So this was constructed by the Canaanites prior to the conquering by the Israelites. And then later this is the same area where Hezekiah's tunnel would be put in.
And darkness likes to burrow and tunnel underneath of stuff and come up and grab from underneath. All of these behind me on the screen, literally all over underneath Jerusalem, are many, many, many Canaanite tunnels, like what's on the screen behind me, and they're giant. And in fact, you'll find the practice of tunneling down under the ground to do the sacrifice, the torture, whatever they're going to do to children in the ancient world. And you see how pitch black it gets, like you went in some tunnels you weren't supposed to go in underneath Jerusalem, but they're just all over the place. And they're giant, just like the giant Goliath, who I am assuming came from those same very families.
That's that direction. And if I move the camera over this way, you can kind of see, but I want you to be able to watch as I walk through. This tunnel is at least 4,000 years old. This is a Canaanite tunnel, and some of the Canaanites were not fully human, if we believe our Bible. Goliath probably wasn't. He was a giant. And I'm walking through one of their passageways under what would later become ancient Israel. They have burrowed their way through. They're like worms. There's something about the underground of the earth. There's something about putting Jesus in prison underneath the earth, putting him in a tomb that's inside the earth. He would emerge from the earth. Sort of represents a death. We went from death to life. And there's something about death or the underneath of the earth that pagan things are really drawn to. They like caves and I like caves too, but there's a lot of cave work here. But they had burrowed their way like insects underneath the ancient city of Jerusalem, where Melchizedek, prior to there being a Jerusalem, was here on top of where we're walking through now.
But this curse was put, right in Genesis 9, this curse was put, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall ye be unto your brothers." And Canaan it's a split off from Ham. So Ham had a variety of children, and one lineage coming through Cush would lead to Nimrod, and you have Egypt, and you have Put, but you also have Canaan that would come from Ham. And by the way, any of these boys could just spiritually come back to the Lord. I mean, God even died. Jesus gave his life even for the Nimrods among us, if we'll humble ourselves. But in this lineage here, there's something spiritually that Nimrod knew, even with the entire empire that he owns, somewhere deep inside his heart, he knew that everything he did was Nimrodish. And he wasn't spiritually, he knew he was off. And so he would blast from his rocks how wonderful that he was. He would claim he was way up here, when the truth is, even with all of his empires and his grandness, he was underneath. He was the guy in the tunnel, underneath the mud. And the reason I believe that is because this is what he was taught by his fathers, by Cush, and more specifically, coming through, there was something, why did Noah put the curse on Canaan, a name which means to humiliate?
It's tall on the ceilings. See, look how tall the ceilings. The ceilings get really tall in this place. So, and I'm headed through this Canaanite tunnel, and this is a mighty. I mean, can you imagine how long I've probably been? Well, I'm looking at the camera now, so I've been walking through this for about 10 minutes by myself in a cave underneath Israel.
But Ham is the father also of Canaan. And through Canaan, we find absolutely no shortage of Baal worship. In fact, their god is often depicted with even their outfits when they went into war would be depicted with like the Vikings type horns, the Canaanites. And I find it interesting that the first land they felt compelled to go settle was exactly the same area that God would call the Promised Land, where he would lead the Hebrews. Canaan had 11 sons. 11 sons. What a fascinating number. 11 is the Qaf. It represents an open hand. It can also mean good or it can mean evil. Through those 11 sons, you would have a lineage that would lead to people such as King Og, the giant, the last of the Rephaim. King Og, his bed was 6 feet wide by 13 feet long. And King Og would take possession with the Canaanites. All of the tribes of the Canaanites had unusual properties, these 11 sons. For example, one of the 11 sons is going to be the one that leads to the Hivites. And that name means wicked, wickedness, cavemen. Their ancestor was Seir, meaning hairy goat demon tempest. Something very strange. No matter how you cut it, happened through this lineage right here. If we rewind back up through Og, back up through the 11 sons, and back up to Canaan, who Noah actually put the curse. Cursed be Canaan. Coming to Numbers 13, verse 33, you gotta love that number. There we saw the giants. The giants. Now these are the sons coming through the lineage of Canaan who are worshiping Moloch and Baal and the whole gamut of it. There we also saw the giants. That can also be translated the Nephilim, the fallen ones. Any of those will work. Here's the part I want to get to. The sons of Anak. Who is this Anak character? We're going to be seeing some more of him, I think. And we were like grasshoppers before them. Cavemen of the seer, the hairy goat demon, you say. So a lineage of at least one, possibly more, trolls that you can't even trust with a goat. Here behind me on the screen, here's another depiction of this character that's being highly honored. Gilgamesh's friend. This is another depiction of Enkidu or Dumazid or Tammuz. You could use either of those names. Here's an image of him on the screen right here from Ur, Iraq. By the way, Ur is where it's commonly believed that Abraham was born. And it's commonly drawn out in this modern age as if that's a triad. So you'd have Nimrod, you would have Inanna, the moon goddess, and you would have Tammuz, just like you would similarly have Horus, that's Osiris, the god of the dead for the Egyptians, and Isis, the moon goddess for the Egyptians over here, these trinities. Now, I'm not solidly convinced that Tammuz, the goat, was actually the son of Nimrod, or in fact, it's stating it's not. Somehow he was born from some kind of supernatural occult practice, which one could only imagine, wherein the Inanna was impregnated by the god Enki. But whatever the case, this thing was reared and behaved like a respected member of the family of Nimrod. So I humbly lay all of that in your hands. I can't tell you exactly what they were doing, but I can tell you what they claim they were doing. Again, this image behind me, this is a painting called The Witches' Sabbath. The truth is, this is going on all throughout history. What they're screaming on those stones, particularly about Tammuz and Enkidu, the goat, is that this was someone that actually lived. That Inanna was impregnated by some kind of a ritual. In fact, this is the origin of your sex magic party rituals. And Gilgamesh would claim similarly. He was the best friend, if you will, of Tammuz. He's claiming, verbatim, is that he is 1 part man and 2 parts God. And I have absolutely no idea what he means by that, other than the elaboration of the occult from that time sounds like a far more potent version, if you will, at least what they're writing, of a cult that you find in this modern age, where they're really going out of their way to summons things in. This is Aleister Crowley was the first person in modern history to draw what we today call a gray alien, which, strangely enough, seems to go hand in hand with other modern occult, like, for example, right here on the screen, you have the magician Elias Levy. He's standing in the magic circle using a grimoire or a book of ritual magic. He's drawn in the picture. He's opened a portal to the dark world to summons an ancient wisdom demon called a Yoda. In fact, I don't even know how they were ever able to copyright the copy of a Yoda, because it appears that the occult had it far before anyone else did. And accordingly, you're finding extraordinarily strange concepts of your opening gods of Egypt, then with the imagery of the goat, of course the serpents on top of the head, as well as around ritual occult centers here in the New World, where you might find skulls like this one here. It's a naturally formed one, often thought to be royalty around those sites. And this one in my hand is naturally formed, meaning that it wasn't headbound as a child to produce this effect. It just was born looking like this. And I have no idea what it is, or why it looks this way, or if it's a normal human, or if it might be something else. I have no clue. I don't know. All I know is it looks strange. And that around those same sites, you find a lot of practices of trying to bind the head, like this one here, where they were binding the head to try and create the same effect, which all has the same appearance as any late night UFO movie, or for that matter, any occultist worth 2 grains of salt is drawing similar images during their practices. And I'm arguing to you that things that look like this probably not only aren't new, but were known all the way back and worshipped at those majestic temples. We really also have no idea how strong the genetics were, particularly directly following that flood, but we have some good records both on bone and also on stone of how power-packed those genetics were. And the biblical record would tend to tell us directly exactly the way that many of the skulls from that time look. That many of these people not only had stronger genetics, and that can have a lot of implications, but they could live for hundreds of years. And with regards to that part of it, the long lifespan part of it, which, by the way, is covered on not just your biblical text, but all of these records are giving you enormous lifespans, that they believed that the people coming right after that flood lived for enormous amounts of time. I believe that there's sound reason within the bone structures to believe that. And a part of that has to do with the bone growth on the front of the face. You can see how the bones in your head, actually in your entire body, continue to grow for your entire life. Your hat is not going. Your hat that fits at the age of 20 is probably not going to fit at the age of 65. And what you're looking at here is enormous bone growth. You can see the brow ridge growth on these Neanderthal skulls is, take a look at it yourself. I sincerely believe, what I believe the strongest, is that there should be more research on all of that, but most especially on the ancient skeletons and the lifespans of the ancient skeletons. Now, with all of their witch doctors, even at the base of Mount Hermon, where they also, right side the mouth of that cave, the mouth of the devil, Pan's Cave, They had an altar in there for human sacrifice. Where didn't they have an altar for human sacrifice? But speaking of ancient Canaanites and sites that have a supernatural flair to them, in fact, sites where it's actually recorded in your biblical text that angels, that something from another dimension, poof, stepped through and came into, in that instance, save Lot. But sites that have a supernatural flair to them, well, the site of Sodom and Gomorrah, if we're talking about angels and things that step through from some other realm that we don't understand, the site of Sodom and Gomorrah would certainly fit that bill. And in fact, the physical effects of Sodom and Gomorrah would fit that bill. Bottom line is, God made sure these were encapsulated in shells that you don't find anywhere else, with sulfur that you don't find anywhere else, because he wanted the cities to become like this, which you don't find anywhere else. And he turned them into ash, which lasts the ages, like this, which you don't find anywhere else. The only way you get that ash is if you burn limestone. And these behind me, what I'm throwing that ash on, and what Lance was about to pick at, here's a sulfur ball. So I'm walking you over to another sulfur ball that Lance found. Look right here in this wall. So here's what a sulfur pellet from God looks like, right here. Look at how these things, they literally, they shotgun into the rock like that. These are like bullets. These are like bullets that are just in the that are just in the wall. Okay, tell me about these sulfur balls. Oh, look at this thing. Look at the size of that chunk. Show him that chunk of line. Now that's a piece of Sodom and Gomorrah. You're not going to find that anywhere else. And if you act now, we'll throw in more of it. There's a whole ball in there. But you
plus a Dead Sea steak knife.
There is a very heavy spirit, and it's behind all of this kind of stuff. I don't care what anybody says. These skulls here that come out of Peru are major megalithic temples. Modern engineers can't even figure out how the temples were built. They're doing human sacrifice. That's what they wanted you to do. Come and bring your babies. And you're finding things that look weird. And I don't know how I have no idea how they got that way or why, only that they look weird. And that's what the texts are telling you, that there were strange things going on in the past, and that they were trying to copy practices from the pre-flood world that had come over in the dark heart, probably of Ham. And the spirit behind it is a spirit still in existence today. Still in existence today. And I'm going to read you from Yashar 4, because so it was in the days of Noah, so also shall it be in the day of the coming of the Son of Man. So what was it like in the days of Noah before the flood? Well, in Yashar 4 it states this: and every man made unto himself a god, an American idol. He was his own god, his own idol. And they robbed and they plundered every man his neighbor and even his relative. Does that sound familiar to your world today? And they corrupted the whole earth, and the earth was filled with violence. And they probably did this as they said they were doing good and they wanted to save the planet. They say they do good. Well, they do everything that's not good. In fact, everything that's actually upside down. They call stealing good. They call theft good. They call lies good. In fact, the empire is built on. Nimrod was the king of liars. In fact, on this little seal here that I'm going to show to you, this little seal that's in my hand, that's the Enki coming forth from the Abzu right there. That's a common image of the Enki coming forth from the Abzu. And right next to him on this side is a little character called the two-faced priest. This is the beginning of your political systems, your politicians. He has two faces because, one, he's going to speak to the masses and tell them warm and fuzzy things. And with the other face, he's whispering to Nimrod what they're really going to do. And he's very close. In fact, he stands right next to the Enki, the two-faced priest that just yaks and mocks with his mocking tongue to the masses. And it goes on, and their judges and rulers were all wicked. This is just like Sodom and Gomorrah. The judges and the rulers were wicked. Right. Okay, this is processed to its purest form, is what he's stating there, and you can see how it just spreads. I've got one burning right now. It turns red, and then it goes black. I mean, it's a really, really quick. You can see, I mean, you know, to imagine the whole city looked like that. Just blood red, then it turns to black. Then it's really going like it's trying to eat the rock alive. I mean, it's just a dirty, yeah. Sound like your court systems today? And even they went into the daughters of men and took their wives by force from the husbands according to their choice. We will do as we will. And the sons of men in those days, now watch this, took from the cattle of the earth and the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air, and they taught the mixture of creature with creature. What was that genetics like at that time? What are they drawing on those walls? Were there things possible then that aren't as easily possible now, that men have to work out a little bit harder? They taught the mixture of creature with creature, the mixing of animal one kind with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, that it was corrupt. This is before the flood. For all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth, all men and all animals. But Noah had found grace with the Lord, and he was righteous. Righteous. And what does that mean? Righteous in his generations. He was literally righteous and also was pure. I don't think he probably looked like this, did he? Whatever this is. All flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth, and all men and all animals, except those that Noah was given instructions, very special instructions, to only take, just like it says on the stone, 2 by 2. So whatever all of the issues were, this side of the flood that we're going on didn't begin out here with Nimrod, but they began in that lineage, back here before Cush, and somewhere, whatever this goat weirdness business is, first started this side of the flood, right here between Ham and Canaan. And whatever the cause was that Noah felt a need to place a curse right there. And speaking of trinities from the ancient past, the occult's got quite a few of these. Really came to love these trinities, where you also have the part man, part God creature that is created in these unions, in these triplicates. Well, back in ancient Samaria, Sumer, Akkad, even ancient Elam over here, the most prized artifacts, and this is the truth of it, like this document here. This is the tablet of Atrahasis. It's written in Akkadian, and it's from 1660 BC or thereabouts. Atrahasis is the Noah on this account. You're going to find a lot of names for Noah. In fact, you're going to find one of the most prized things on not just some, not just a few, but all, pretty well all of these stones, coming from the very beginning of our recorded history. It's almost as if they are desperate on these rocks for any little bit, any little detail that they can share and call grand wisdom from their gods, their sages, that comes from that world before the flood. Or, more specifically, a desperation to know even a little bit about some knowledge that Atrahasis Utnapishtim, those are both names for Noah, that Noah would have had. And when you begin to come at it from that perspective, even with their trinities of gods, it begins to open up a brand new picture for you. But there's no argument of this. Whatever it was they were doing, they were taking it very seriously. You have a bird one that sort of looks like it has a crow's head. The crow was the prized bird in all of their flood accounts. So whereas in the biblical account of Genesis, it's the dove. Both are covered in these accounts. But in their accounts, they like the crow, the worthless bird, the raven. Now these are the bird cages. These are the cages at the top for the birds. That Noah is going to literally use the birds like you see here. Here is Noah and his wife depicted in this display, and he's releasing the dove. Now the dove is the symbol. He released both a dove and a raven. Some of these cages contain, like this cage here, you have the crow or the raven, the dark bird, just like in the book of Job, when God asked Satan, "Where comest thou?" And Satan says, "From going to and fro in all of the earth." So worthless character, just roaming about like a lion seeking to whom he may devour. The same was described of the raven, that it went to and fro. It was a worthless bird. But the dove, here Noah is releasing the dove, which represents peace. The olive branch that it returns within his mouth also represents Israel, And it came back, and it was the symbol for the dry land that had appeared when Noah released the dove. Over here, more of the bird cages, these keeping animals. And as we come over to this section, you have the living quarters for Noah. And the scrolls, not only with the garments given by God to Adam and Eve have been on this boat. They would have been kept with Noah. These would have been prized possessions of Noah. But also the scrolls, the words, the prophecies of his great-grandfather, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, the one who was not, for God took him. In fact, it would be very difficult to believe that Noah got all the animals on board and forgot to bring his personal belongings. In fact, I would take that a stage further with all of the artifacts that you have to this very day, and you're lucky to have them, which scream about that world before the flood and about Noah and his family on a variety of different forms. I wouldn't be shocked if there were artifacts that went all the way back to Adam himself, which Noah had, that exist even to this very day. Some of the scenes you watch there, by the way, come from Answers in Genesis, Noah's Ark recreation. Absolutely mesmerizing. Even if you're an atheist, you need to go look at it. In their exhibit, not only is there space for all of the animals, but generous space for Noah, the three sons, and their wives. Now, as I move through this way, you have, and the boat would have had enormous sections where you could grow food and store food. You don't know how long you're going to be on board this boat. And the boat isn't really designed to go anywhere. It's just designed to float. And above all this, above where you had the potted plants that are dangling and growing, whatever they might be growing in these areas where you have all sorts of food growing, right above this you have the windows that are described in Genesis, where the sunlight would go through, and it literally goes all the way down to all of the animals, even in the bottom. But following that flood, they literally are building a tower, and the purpose of the tower is to be a gate for the god, a gate for a dark god. And this is complete with chimera, evil, dark angel, human hybrid type of practices, recreations, rituals, worship, and presumably, as always, human sacrifice. When you're talking about Nimrod's inner lair, before which he might throw Abraham to the floor and say, "Who are you?" Well, these would be his sages. His sages. You've got one like a man, one like a raven, and one like, coincidentally, a fish, representing the flood, the Abzu. These are the three Apkellu sage forms. Now, what's fascinating about this is there were actually specifically 7 sages. And here again, just like I could describe on any one of these rocks, that there's almost a desperation to copy, as if this lineage here coming through Ham was, just to be very frank with you, desperate for any. In fact, the word occult, which that's what all these are, they're occult documents. Come bring your babies, feed them to the fire of the serpent. That's an occult document. As if coming through Ham, what he was teaching his sons and children through this lineage here was any little twinkle of information that he had from before the flood, only he had twisted it. But through the lineage of Ham, Cush, and Nimrod, we have 7 sages listed right here, all 7 of them. Apparently complete on occasion with weird little outfits that could look like birds or fish or with the wings of angels. And in the center of it, if you remember correctly, it would be Nimrod, who had these special garments amongst his cast of the witch doctors. If we were to make one overriding assessment of all of the beginning, the opening cities and empires and little bitty temples of ancient Samaria, all of them are a longing in their documents, their stories, their stones, a longing for the world, to have little pieces of that world before that flood and to deify them in their temples. As if amongst these 3 boys, and these weren't children, by the way, these were full-grown men. They're probably older than many of you watching this. They are. We're going to look at that. They definitely are. These were full-grown men who had helped build a full-size super tanker ship. That's what these boys were. But the 2 of these boys and Noah wanted out of that world. But that one of those boys, specifically Ham, carried that pre-flood world over in the dark parts of that pre-flood world. He carried them over in his heart. And from his heart, or the dark parts thereof, that he probably tried to keep inside, it takes an awful lot for a father like Noah. There's not even anyone else in the world to say, son, I'm putting a curse on you. And there was some part of this that dealt with Noah's nakedness. Ham was in it. It's mentioned in the text just very strangely. What was Ham doing? What was Ham doing? The origins of Samaria, just like the origins in that pre-flood world, were all a sexual orgy, a perversion of all sorts. What's Ham doing in the tent, looking at his father's nakedness? Then he's going to steal. But it has to go even further than that for a father to say, look, son, we're done. We're done. We're done. I'm not even giving you a blessing. I'm putting a curse through that lineage. And not even directly on you, but on one of your sons, because son, just get away from us. It takes a lot. Oh, something has happened for a father to do that. And I'm arguing to you that from Ham's heart, things that were in his heart are the very same things, and the desires, the lust for that pre-flood world is what you're seeing painted forth. What are these characters that are coming forth on that empire? The gorgeous murals on the walls coming forth from ancient Samaria and Acadia, or the witchy dudes in the bird and fish outfits. But what's fascinating about this is that there were, in ancient Samaria, there were exactly 7 sages of Sumer. These are called Apkellu, 7 of them. Now, if I come down to number 7, they call him Utu Abzu. And of Utu Abzu, they say he was the one who ascended unto heaven. Well, if I take this list and I go from Adam all the way down to Enoch, who ascended into heaven, well, Enoch was the 7th from Adam. Now they butchered this, so don't start thinking highly of them. But this is called, this right here in my hand, this is called the Enoch stone. And it's the tablet or the stone from the 7 sages of Sumer, which talks about the 7th, and they're in order. The 7th of these sages, who they were twisting all of them, is what they were doing. Just like they twisted everything, but they would twist it. And Utu Abzu, who we're going to talk about, is who they described as the one who ascended into heaven. This is the Enoch tablet I'm holding in my hand. And there I saw one. These texts come out of those caves behind me. And there I saw one who had a head of days. That's the Godhead. And his head was like that of white wool. And with him was another, whose countenance had the appearance of a man. Who is that? And his face was full of grace, like one of the holy angels. And I asked of the angel, I inquired of the angel who went with me and showed me all these hidden things concerning this one, this Son of Man, who he was, whence he was, and why he accompanied the Ancient of Days. This right here is the Sumerian Kings List. It's essentially a horizontal prism, about so big. And pretty well everyone agrees that the top section, that the first section of the text is talking about pre-flood kings. Now, there are 8 of them. Some scholars will say 10, but you have to use a mixture of documents to get there. Let's just go with the 8 kings that we find on the Sumerian Kings List. Now, before they discuss the 8 kings, these 8 pre-flood, pre-diluvian kings, it states this: when the kingship was lowered from heaven. What does that mean? When the kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Now, it would only make sense that they would speak of Eridu because Eridu is the actual site of the Tower of Babel. This was an actual ziggurat, a towering ziggurat, one of the largest, many football fields in size, just for the base of it. The ziggurat of Eridu was somehow shaken to its base. This right here is the Eridu Genesis that I'm holding in my hand right here. And this right here on the screen, in the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of mankind, where everything started, this right here is where that tower was, where that ancient ziggurat was, the ziggurat of Eridu. Just a little ways down from where the boat that saved all mankind is recorded to have landed. But if I come back to my Sumerian Kings List in its general overview, when the kingship was lowered from heaven, it was in Eridu. Now, if there are 8 kings, and by the way, those 8 kings reigned for 241,200 years, according to the Sumerian Kings List. So whatever scribe authored this, put this together, collaborated this work of the history of Samaria, the history of the kings of Samaria, believed that there were extremely long lifespans on these kings before that flood. Now, if the first king was lowered from heaven, could that possibly, and I'm just throwing this out there, could that possibly be talking about Adam? Their belief that Adam was directly from God, therefore from heaven. Now, over in Genesis 1:27, it states this. Verse 27, so God created man, that's us, in his, God's own image. In the image of God, he created him. Well, that's a bold statement. What does that even mean? But make absolutely no mistake about it, these texts are going to go on to tell you that you are in a place not only teeming with life, but lots of things you don't understand that are behind the scenes and that will pretend to be friendly, but are looking only to destroy you. So that brings up the question, how would one know the difference between the two things? Let's keep looking. Let's keep going on our Sumerian kings list. We go a little further into this. What they're directly stating is that there were really long lifespans before the flood on that document. There's no argument of that. And then directly following that flood, they had still pretty long lifespans, but not like before the flood. But more than this, you're looking at 8 of them. And of course, Adam wouldn't count because he would be the kingship lowered from heaven, if we'd be correct on that. And then you have 8 kings, and then of course, on the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim, or Noah. Utnapishtim is the Noah on the Gilgamesh account. Well, Noah wouldn't count because he came over the flood. So that would leave 8, which would actually make the 10 generations, the genealogy of 10 generations, generation-wise, that you have from Adam to Noah in your biblical Genesis text. Now, the properties of just that list of names, I find so many properties in those biblical texts, all the way down to the letters, the minute details. But just in this list of names here, just this list of 10 names, which I promise you, you will never find anything like it on the Eridu Genesis. Or in Gilgamesh's list of girls, and how much fun he had playing around with Tammuz. If I look at the literal meaning of these names in the book of Genesis, it reads, man, appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching. That's Enoch's name. Enoch was the 7th from Adam. Now, there were 7 sages in ancient Samaria. 7 sages in ancient Samaria. Witch doctor sages. What were they trying to copy in ancient Samaria? These right here are called the Apkelu. These are the Apkelu sages. There were 7 of them in ancient Samaria. These would be the witch doctors at the time of Nimrod, at the time of the Tower of Babel, the time of Inanna. The powerful religious leadership, almost like they're wearing these special outfits. But what is it they were trying, these human animal type figures? Now, it's not just that there were 7 sages, just as with Enoch and Ham. Ham would have known, he wouldn't have had the actual texts, the documents that Noah would have carried over on the boat following the flood. But he would have had the knowledge of everything that Noah had taught him. And in Enoch, you have 7 angels that Enoch corresponds to in that entire document. No matter what anyone believes about it, there's 7 angels, each with their own purposes. Well, there are 7 of these occult witch doctor sages in ancient Samaria. And the last one is Utu Abzu. Notice that name, Utu, just like on this tablet. Something very special they meant in Sumerian Akkadian with this name, Utu. This that I'm holding in my hand, this is called the Enoch tablet, or the Enoch stone. Now, Enoch is the one that was not, for God took him in Genesis 5, the number of grace. Now, on the Enoch tablet, written in both Akkadian and Sumerian, it says that Utu Abzu, which was the 7th, ascended into heaven. That's why it's called the Enoch tablet. And that little tablet is from Nineveh. And to put that in perspective, so here's the Tower of Babel, way down here. Here's Ur and Uruk. Nineveh is way up here. It's actually a lot closer to where the boat that saved all mankind landed than a lot of the other stuff dropping down in here. Nineveh is right there. Now, Nineveh is where Jonah, seen right here, an old painting of Jonah, was spit up by a fish. He tried to run, he hated the people, he didn't like the people of Nineveh. And God had said, go tell them to repent or I'm going to destroy them. And Jonah tried to run from God and even went on a ship. And the sailors, bad things were happening to the sailors on the ship, and they came to the conclusion that the stranger who had booked a ride on board with them was the source of all of their problems occurring to them. So they decided to throw Jonah overboard. And in the course of this, a large fish, and I find that interesting, this strange large fish that got Jonah, because you find so many types of creatures in the ancient world that you don't even have today, but you certainly still have whales or big fish, which is commonly how that's drawn out to be. And you even have images and video you can watch this very day where people might get sucked in for a second to a whale's mouth, and the whale will kind of swish them around and figure out how I'm going to spit them up. But in this fish's case, Jonah is in that fish for 3 days. 3 days he's in that fish. Then the fish lays itself on the shore and it's kind of choking stuff up, and it chokes Jonah out. And then the people of Nineveh really listen to this message to repent from Jonah, because he came out of a fish. Well, in Nineveh, which is, by the way, located right up here by Babylon, the beliefs they held would, of course, have been the beliefs in this strange Canaanite Philistine god, Dagon. Part man, part fish god, Dagon is what they worship. The part man, part fish that you see a lot in history, Dagon. So after Jonah had been inside of the whale and he's being spit out literally onto the shore of Nineveh, the people of Nineveh saw this. Well, they believed Jonah. And in fact, Jesus Christ, when the people were calling out for a miracle, you wicked generation, you're demanding a sign. I give you nothing but the sign of Jonah. Jonah was in the whale, belly of the fish, for 3 days. But heading back over to the inception, the start of what would be ancient Babylon, in fact, more specifically, Eridu, right here, because these witch doctors of ancient Samaria, these are the sages, these are the witch doctors of that ziggurat out there in Eridu. And it's almost certainly really like they were trying to, there's no argument that these texts represent antediluvian, that means pre-flood, before the flood. These were copies of pre-flood, like we're trying to recreate pre-flood characters or even pre-flood angels. But like everything on the occult documents, it's night and day difference. It's upside down. And in the ancient world, one of the important things was the Mies. These come from the teachings of Enki, or the secret knowledge of the gods. And a part of those is going to be acting or pretending. Now, not in a constructive sense. And also, what's going to be involved in that, all the way back to the very beginning, is the court jester, like what's pictured right here. It's important to note that if one were going to be running or even trying to start an extraordinarily wicked, dark empire, there's got to be ways to make that palatable to the common man. And the court jester will wear all of these funny masks. The purpose of the court jester, this isn't about doing comedy to make people laugh or bring people joy, or acting to actually entertain people. No, this is a whole different kind of beast. This is comedy, routines, and acts that have become an arm of the government, a dark arm of the government. They're there when someone is doing something Nimrod doesn't like. Then you need a set of people to come out and mock and humiliate and belittle and press down, all the way even to death, because they're going to use what would amount to the modern day canned laughter. The jesters are to laugh and mock at anybody of righteousness, and in this manner kind of get the crowds lightened up, even if they're going to kill those people. Is what the court jester, in fact, that's specifically the idea, is to make horrible, atrocious acts and evil funny, and to take good men and make them look like idiots and ridicule them. That is part of the teaching of the holy inky me's. But nonetheless, Ham would have known, in this lineage right here, this lineage would also split off to include Nimrod. Ham would have known all of the things taught by Noah. The only problem was he would teach everybody things flipped upside down. And he certainly would have known of Enoch, of whom in the biblical text it's written this. Genesis 5, number of grace starting in 19. And after Yared became the father of Enoch, Yared lived 800 years. 800, what an interesting number. 8 is always the number of new beginnings. Something new began with Enoch. And he had other sons and daughters. Yared did. 21. Notice the numbers here. 21. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. Something happened to him at the age of 65 that would change him. Something happened. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God. When Enoch left, he had this testimony that he pleased God. Enoch walked with God, faithfully with God, for 300 years. 300. God really likes that number 300. That was how many men Gideon had. And he had other sons and daughters, Enoch did. And altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years, the same amount as what's on your calendar. Enoch always says in his book of Enoch, they're going to reckon the days wrong. They're going to reckon and he was right. He was taken away. God took him. Was that a symbol of something? That in the time of the end, the time his book is written for, geared for, that will be the number of days. That was not the calendar days back then. They used 360-day calendars. 360-day calendars, like a perfect circle. And then they would do workouts for both the sun and the moon. 365 years. Same number as your calendar today. Verse 24. Here again, always a number of high authority. And by the way, these verse numbers were not on there when the texts were written. But it's almost as if God has his hand on everything that goes into these documents. And even leaves preserved for you little rocks where they glorified even little fragments, little bitty fragments of who their ancestors and forefathers were. Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Verse 24, number of high authority. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So that would indeed bring us full circle back to our 10 generations from the book of Genesis. Going from Adam down to Noah. 10, by the way, is a number of completion. That's how many plagues there were in ancient Egypt. In the Exodus story. 10 times Pharaoh, and we're done. We're done. Man, appointed mortal sorrow, the blessed God shall come down, teaching, that's Enoch, number 7, the one who was not. His death, whose death? God's death, shall bring the despairing, that's you and I, rest and comfort, that's Noah's name. 10 generations, Adam to Noah. You would have an impossible time convincing me that some rabbis concocted that in the Genesis text. But if we swing back over to our Sumerian kings list, when the kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu, where they built their big tower. There were 8 kings. Now this is all pre-flood that they're talking about here. Came down, was lowered in Eridu. There were 8 kings that reigned for an enormously eons of time. Then the flood came and swept them all away. Sound familiar? Now, there are many that believe that the Sumerian Kings list actually uses a sexagesimal system. And what that would mean in short is that it has a whole lot of 6s in it. And behind all that, look at what we've done. Our sages, our angels of ancient wickedness. We come down, in fact, to number 6 right here. The conjurer of the city of Eridu. That's where the tower was. And in fact, why not, while we're at it, even flip upside down Enoch himself. Number 7, Utu Abzu. Even turn him. Hee ha ha, dare you to question it? Yes, sir. Even take the beliefs of Noah and twist them upside down on their documents. Take the angels written about by Noah's great-grandfather Enoch and flip them upside down to be the 7 devil sages of ancient Sumer. When they say days of Noah, it's not just a little genetics and mixing of the animals or trying to mix stuff with demons and mankind or violence beyond belief or wicked judges. It is a full package, even taking the words of the forefathers and making lies and mockeries out of them. There's the new angel right there under the pale blue moonlight. Or moving over to ancient Egypt, there's the old goat with all the snakes and the sun god, just like the sun god Utu. He's got the sun disk on top of his head. The old goat, the new angels. And now emerging forth, all of Inky's me empires have canned laughter jokesters, behind which the spirit of the old goat breathing forth from his ancient stones. Hey, and there's Santa right there. Isn't old Nimrod often compared to Santa from the North Pole? Why not have 7 replicas with outfits, part man, part animal, like someone's really looking back into that pre-flood world? And make those our conjurers for the city of Eridu. And the praise of Tammuz, Azazel, the witch's Sabbath, the goat, the everything that God has made upside down. Claiming they were wise, they'd become as fools. This was the belief structure of the ancient world order, the world order of Enki, perhaps a foreshadowing of a coming world order. Which brings us sort of back to exactly the writings found on these stones in Merkur or Nimrod and the Lord of Arata that he was riding up to in the mountains. He's stating, let Arata, that's Noah that he's writing back in Torah 4:2, build me. Remember the holy me's, the me's? The me's that come from Enki and Enki's world order. Let Arata build for me a temple brought down from heaven, your Enki's place of worship. Let Arata skillfully fashion the interior of the holy Japar, the pagan temple, your Enki or Satan's holy abode. May I, Nimrod and Merkur, the radiant youth, listen to how he refers to himself. Over in the book of Yasher, it says that Cush, that's Ham's son, that Cush gave those garments to the son of his old age, the baby, the spoiled brat, Nimrod of the family. I, the radiant youth, Nimrod is far younger, obviously, than Noah. May I be embraced by you there. He's literally writing this to Noah. The holy me's, me, build for me. Oh man, it's almost like nails on chalkboard for the ancient world, isn't it? I mean, imagine if you, no matter who you were, and you received that kind of text written on, look, lay off the goat brew and the fermented barley, buddy. I understand, but why don't you take a day, get your head clear before you start writing on rocks? You sent me what? But I want to skip forward in time a little bit because Gilgamesh comes after in Merkur. Like, this is the spoiled brat of the heavy high kingship here that is writing to somebody up in the Urartu mountains. But later on, when Gilgamesh is one of the spoiled brats of ancient Samaria, he goes and he takes a journey, and he describes for us in his epic where he's going to. Someone that in Merkur was riding back and forth to up in those mountains. Well, Gilgamesh, the spoiled rich kid, when he's kind of down on it, he's looking for the meaning to life, if you will. And he's going to get that upside down. But he's going to take a journey and he's going to describe to us as best he can where it is he went to. Now, his description of where he went, up near in the direction of the Twin Peaks, looks a lot like the Urartu Mountains, or the mountains of Ararat. You have Greater Ararat and you have Little Ararat that's out there. And indeed, before Gilgamesh was broken, and he didn't listen in his brokenness, but at least he saw it. You know, it says that wise men seek him, or at least seek out somebody that can point the direction to the one above. But Nimrod, a name which today means fool, he was writing to this one up in these mountains, between these two peaks. And he was writing on these stones, the many-tongued Sumer and Akkad, the whole universe, that was his whole universe. The well-guarded people, may they all address Enlil, that's another name for Enki, the Lord of the air, together in a single language and a single tongue. That's what's on these stones. Enki, the Lord of abundance and steadfast decisions, the wise and knowing Lord of the earth, the Lord of the wisdom of the tower of Eridu. It's on these rocks. Shall have the speech in their mouths. So the speech of mankind is truly one. This is what the old goat was writing in these rocks to somebody up here in the mountains. Who do you think that was that he was writing to? Someone that also didn't think highly of his fathers, like Utu. But it is said that Utu knew the way up there, whatever way that is. But the replies that he got for his messengers, his finest messengers, he said, taking these stones back and forth. The replies he got are, what is it to me what your master has spoken? What is it to me what that Nimrod has said? We shall indeed be picking this up right where we left off with our Dark Lord Nimrod. In part 4 of the Genesis study by the God in a Nutshell project, the Tower of Babel, coming next. Actually, it's available right now to go watch. Tower of Babel. Nimrod, he's just really a guy that likes to go around and try and pick a fight. But it was Gilgamesh on his epic on tablet 10 who tells us when he had finally broken down, he was going to go find Utnapishtim, Noah. He wanted to go find Noah, the one who his fathers before him shamefully cursed. Maybe one that could give him answers, that lived in the mountains. But Gilgamesh writes, if possible, I will cross the sea. The only one who crosses the sea is the valiant Shemesh, the Utu, from the Utu tablet. Why would he know the way? Except for him. Is that him? Except for him who can cross. Gilgamesh continues, and he says that he went forth from Ur and Uruk. Okay, so this is Ur and this is Uruk, right here by where the Tower of Babel was. And he says he went upwards in the direction following upwards the Tigris and Euphrates until he arrived finally in the land of the Pleasant Valley between the two mountain peaks. I'm Trey Smith of God in a Nutshell, and I want to thank every single one of you for watching Secrets of Sumerian Stones. On the second half of this documentary, we are indeed going to go look at those two Twin Peaks more from Gilgamesh's epic. And when he talks about Utu, now Utu is the grandfather of Nimrod. When he talks about Utu coming out of these mountains here, he's the only one that knows the way. You know, this is an Utu and Shemesh seal over here that also seems to have these two mountain peaks on it. The Utu or Shemesh. Why do I think that's all going to play a role? As we walk into the Tower of Babel, which is the fourth section of our Genesis study. And I want to give all praise for these films and even the ability to make them. It's been a lot of fun to make these films. I want to give all praise to the Lord God of the heavens, the God of Noah, the God of every single cell of this place. I'm Trey Smith of God in a Nutshell. I want to thank you for coming on this journey. This has been a fun one, I think. Secrets on Sumerian Stones. I want to thank you for coming on this journey with me. These are what the books that go with, and you're going to want copies of these to, particularly if you're going to watch it. Well, you can watch it without the book, but you're going to love it with the book. And these look fantastic, stellar, stunning, beyond belief, on a coffee table. This one is the pre-flood and also Exodus. And the last in this particular Genesis series will be the Exodus story. And I've wanted to do that for years and tell it in a way like has never been told, which we will accomplish. Actually, all of these, each one I worked to make it a little better than the one before it. But the Tower of Babel in full length, by the way, and it's pretty hot. I put some work into that puppy. And probably Nimrod's done too. Nimrod, the Dark Lord. You know what? Just come over and enjoy, and you kick back and come on some rides. And I hope you enjoyed this ride. You'll love the Tower of Babel, and it's already ready to go. These are all fully illustrated. If you get copies of these over at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, please do a favor and write a review of them. And also, take a picture of the books sitting on your coffee table and post them somewhere online. But definitely do a review of them. I'm Trey Smith of God in a Nutshell, the Dark Lord Nimrod back there. It's getting a little hot under the goat collar. I'm Trey Smith. God bless every last one of you and your families. Every single one of you and your families on the other side of the screen.